Okay, so have you ever felt like something's hiding right there in front of you? Something you can't quite figure out.
Yeah.
Like it's almost invisible. That's what we're looking at today. We're going deep into this idea of the house beyond. And we're going to check out this possible podcast called The Invisible Enemy.
Interesting.
It's all about hate and prejudice, those things that aren't always obvious, but they really affect our world. We've got some pretty cool research and insights to share with you.
Looking forward to it.
Get ready. You might be surprised by what we find.
Okay, so what's interesting is this invisible enemy, it's not always easy to spot. It's not like some guy in a mask, right?
Right.
It kind of blends in. It hides in our biases and what society tells us is normal.
Yeah.
And those biases, we're not necessarily born with them.
Oh, right.
They kind of build up over time, from how we grow up, what we see on TV, even jokes we hear as kids.
That's kind of creepy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, thinking we could be prejudiced without even realizing it.
Yeah, it is a bit. Think of it like this. Our brains get a ton of information all the time.
Yeah.
To handle it, they take shortcuts, they use stereotypes and general ideas to simplify things.
Makes sense.
And that can be helpful, but it also leads to what's called implicit bias.
Oh, I've heard of that.
We start assuming things about people based on their group, not who they are as individuals.
Okay, so how can we even tell if we have these biases? They seem so deep down,
Yeah.
It's like trying to catch a shadow.
Well, researchers have some tools, like this thing called the implicit association test.
Okay.
It measures how strong our unconscious links are between different groups and ideas.
Really?
Yeah, it's amazing how these tests can show us biases we don't even know we have.
That's both cool and a little scary.
Yeah.
But okay, let's say we do figure out these biases. How do they actually show up in real life? Like, what does this invisible enemy look like when it's doing its thing?
Imagine this. You're in a meeting, and a woman has a brilliant idea.
Okay, yeah. Happens all the time.
But instead of getting praise, she gets doubts, and people interrupt her.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that.
Now, maybe there are good reasons for that reaction, but it could also be those unconscious biases about women and leadership.
Interesting.
That's what we call a microaggression, a little, often unintentional act that keeps prejudice going.
So we're not just talking about obvious discrimination.
Yeah.
It's these small things that can build up and make someone feel like they don't belong or that they're not valued.
Exactly. And these microaggressions can happen anywhere, at work, with friends, even online.
Makes sense.
They all add up to what we call systemic prejudice, where bias is built into our systems and structures.
Wow. Okay, this is starting to feel kind of overwhelming. We've got these hidden biases messing with our perceptions, microaggressions happening every day, and systemic prejudice holding it all together. It's like this big tangled mess. How do we even start to fix this?
Yeah, it is complicated, no doubt, but I think that's where those personal stories can help. When you hear from people who've actually faced this prejudice, it makes it real. It hits you differently.
Oh, definitely. Numbers and research are good, but they don't always have the same impact as hearing someone's story.
Right, exactly. And if this podcast can give those voices a platform, that'd be huge.
Yeah, for sure.
Imagine like an episode where someone talks about being racially profiled or dealing with discrimination at work.
Yeah, that would be powerful.
Suddenly those ideas of implicit bias and microaggressions aren't just theories anymore.
They become real.
People can actually put themselves in someone else's shoes and see the world from a whole new perspective.
It's not just about the bad stuff, though, right? We need stories of people fighting back, of people overcoming, and those who are actively trying to change these systems.
Exactly. We need those positive stories, too. What are people doing to fight hate and create inclusivity? How can we learn from them and help them out? This podcast could connect people with those opportunities.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And speaking of connecting people, what about social media?
Oh, yeah.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Totally.
It can spread hate and create echo chambers, but it can also be a tool for education and awareness and, connecting with different points of view.
Yeah, it's wild how those algorithms can shape our online experience.
Right.
They can trap us in filter bubbles where we only see stuff that confirms our beliefs.
In there.
But they can also expose us to new ideas and challenge what we think. It depends on how these platforms are designed and controlled.
So how do we use social media in a way that brings people together instead of dividing them? It feels like a constant battle against misinformation.
For sure. It's a tough one. But we're not powerless. We can be careful about the sources we trust.
Right.
We can actively seek out different opinions and talk to people, even when we disagree, respectfully, of course.
Oh, yeah.
We can also support groups that are fighting online hate speech and hold those social media companies accountable.
It's important to remember that we can actually do something about all of this.
Absolutely.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but our choices matter.
Every little bit helps.
Whether it's calling out a prejudiced comment, educating ourselves about systemic oppression, or donating to organizations fighting for social justice, every step counts.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's what this Invisible Enemy podcast could really nail.
Yeah, how so?
It could give listeners the tools, the resources, and the different perspectives they need to make a difference in their own lives and in their communities.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about the personal impact, the structures of society, the online world. It's a lot to take in. But is there something that connects all of this? An idea that can help us dismantle this invisible enemy?
I think there is empathy.
Empathy.
If we can understand and share the feelings of others, truly see the world through their eyes, that's where real change starts.
I love that. Empathy is the answer to hate.
Hmm.
But how do we actually become more empathetic in a world that feels so divided? Can we learn it?
Absolutely. It starts with being open to new experiences, listening to different points of view, and challenging our own assumptions and biases.
We have to step outside our comfort zones.
Yeah. Connect with people who are different from us.
And that can look like a lot of things, right? Volunteering in our communities, going to events that celebrate diverse cultures, just having honest conversations with people from different backgrounds.
Exactly. And remember, empathy doesn't mean agreeing with everything or accepting bad behavior.
Right.
It's about trying to understand where people are coming from, even if we don't share their views.
This brings up something I've been thinking about. We've been talking a lot about what individuals can do, but what about those bigger systems and institutions that keep these inequalities going? How do we tackle those?
That's a crucial question. We need to push for policies that promote equality and justice,
Yeah,
support groups fighting against systemic racism and discrimination, and hold our leaders accountable for creating a more just and fair society.
so it's a multi-pronged attack.
Yeah,
Individual action, systemic change, and a whole lot of empathy.
you got it. It's about realizing that this is a team effort, a journey we take together if we want a world where everyone can thrive.
I really like the idea of ending this podcast with a call to action.
Yeah.
Something specific listeners can do each week to challenge prejudice in their own lives.
I like it. Keep it practical.
It could be as simple as thinking about our own biases, having a tough conversation with someone, or donating to an organization working for social justice.
Perfect. It's about giving listeners the power to be part of this movement for change, not just watching from the sidelines.
It feels like we just dipped our toes in the water here.
Yeah.
But wow, this has been really insightful.
Yeah.
We went from how our minds work to the big systems that keep these biases going. It's complicated stuff.
Yeah.
But I think there's hope in all of this.
I think so too. And that hope comes from realizing that this invisible enemy we've been talking about loses its power when we bring it out into the open.
Right.
When we see it for what it is, we can start to take it apart.
Totally. Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
The more we know about prejudice, the better we can fight it in ourselves, in our communities, and in the world.
I'm reminded of that quote by James Baldwin. He said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced."
That's powerful.
And that's what we've been doing, right? Facing this invisible enemy head on, digging into it, and looking for those bits of hope, even in the tough stuff.
Okay, so for those listening, let's do a quick recap of what we've learned. We started by defining this invisible enemy, those subconscious biases and societal norms that shape how we see things and what we do often without us even knowing.
Right, and we talked about how those biases can lead to those little acts of prejudice, those microaggressions that add up to systemic inequality.
We also looked at how powerful personal stories can be, both to understand what people who've faced prejudice have gone through and to highlight the work of those fighting for change.
We also talked about social media and how it can be a tool for both good and bad, depending on how it's used.
But through it all, one big takeaway stood out: the importance of empathy, learning to understand and share the feelings of others, to see the world through their eyes. That's where real change happens.
And while changing the systems is key, we also talked about how much our individual actions matter.
We all have a part to play in challenging prejudice, whether it's looking at our own biases, having those tough conversations, supporting groups fighting for equality, or just being aware of our own biases in our daily lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay, hit us with it.
What's one small thing you can do this week to promote understanding or challenge prejudice in your own life?
I like that. Keep it simple.
It could be reading a book by an author from a different background, volunteering your time to a cause you care about, or just really listening to perspectives that are different from your own.
Great ideas.
Every little step we take, no matter how small, brings us closer to a world where this invisible enemy doesn't have any power.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of learning and exploring. And remember, there's always more to learn, more to understand, and more to do.